only was it an incredible weekend in the National Football League and the MLB postseason, but college football may have had the most upsets for a week in the history of the sport. You had, of course, Vanderbilt knocking off Alabama. You had Arkansas knocking off Tennessee. You have Minnesota knocking off USC. You have Washington knocking off Michigan, shaking up the top 10. And the question now is, ladies and gentlemen, who is the best team in college football? And I think the answer to that is going to be the team that really did not play this weekend, and that is Texas. Number two is now obviously Ohio State. Number three is Oregon, which is really interesting, obviously, because Oregon takes on Ohio State this weekend in Eugene. That's a huge game for Oregon, who has looked better the past couple of weeks. Dylan Gabriel, the transfer, obviously, he's looking more comfortable in that Oregon system, but we'll see if they can match up physicality wise against the Buckeyes, who have not been tested yet. This will be their first test. Now, Chip Kelly obviously knows Oregon, the new Ohio State OC, because he came from UCLA and the Pac-12. Very interesting there. But I think what this college football weekend showed, not only is conference realignment good for the sport, not only is getting rid of divisions good for the sport, we have better competition in the SEC, we have better competition in the Big Ten. But I do think this college football weekend, which again featured incredible upsets, some defensive games like Arkansas against Tennessee, some games like Miami, Florida, and Cal, where Cam Ward was in a shootout, games like Alabama, Vanderbilt, where Alabama could not stop Vanderbilt from going up and down the field. What it shows to me is a little bit of the transfer portal and a little bit of the NIL effect. We said this. We said it was going to take a couple years for, these kids coming from maybe bigger schools to the lower schools. And obviously, it's one of the reasons why guys like Nick Saban got out of the sport, why Chip Kelly is now an offensive coordinator and not a head coach. Yes, NIL is a lot. Yes, it is 365-day recruiting now in college football. But if you hit on these NIL players and you give away money and you can get some 4-star players, maybe some 3-star players, you start building that culture. You start putting together a team, and maybe the team on the other side is not as dominant as what they once were with all 5-star and 4-star talent. And I think this is what we get. I think we're getting inconsistency. I think we're getting too many transfers because of the NIL. Obviously, guys are not in systems for years. They're sort of one and dones, moving on to different schools, which I think is hurting the bigger schools, and I think it's helping the smaller schools. And again, unless you're, Ohio State playing Akron, who obviously is in a different conference. But I think in this conference play, everybody in the SEC is competent, right? Everybody in the Big Ten is competent. Ohio State is clearly better than Iowa, but it took them a half to dominate Iowa, and they mostly did it on the defense side of the ball, right? They struggled in the first half of that game. So it's a week to week a week. Was we know Alabama, Georgia. Georgia obviously coming off a bye. They have Texas in a couple weeks. Texas now plays Oklahoma this week, the Red River rivalry. It's going to be an insane game in college football as Texas looks to cement their spot, in my opinion, as I've said all season long, as the number one team in the country, whether it's Arch Manning or Quinn Ewers at the quarterback position. But when you play that physical game that Alabama and Georgia played a week ago, we showed some signs of Alabama earlier against Vanderbilt. They did not take them seriously. Vanderbilt's been in a lot of competitive games this year. Vanderbilt felt like they had the momentum from the beginning, and Alabama, again, could not get any stops. Same thing could be said about Arkansas, except the opposite, where they just shut down Tennessee. And Tennessee's offense was really out of rhythm all night long. Arkansas was able to get a pass rush on Tennessee, disrupt the passing game. And, that was all she wrote for that game. We said Michigan was not going to be as talented this year. We said Washington lost a lot of pieces as well. That was a very interesting game. Obviously, a rematch from the national championship game with completely different parts to it. And then what Minnesota did to USC was again get pressure on Miller Moss early, force him out of the pocket, force him to make eye reads. And again, we're seeing this in the NFL as well. Offensive line play is down. A lot of the emphasis is on receivers, screen game, get the ball out quick. There's terrible tackling, and not only the NFL, but in college football as well. It's very hard right now to be able to tackle in space. And it's very hard also to keep the run game going when all these teams want to do is spread it out and throw it. So it's a combination of a lot of things. But I believe this weekend was the shifting of guards in college football. I have said, I still feel like there are 6 or 7 really good teams in the sport. Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Miami, who, as I mentioned, barely survived against Cal. Obviously, I think you have to put Tennessee in there. So Georgia, Bama, Tennessee from the SEC. I think Ole Miss is probably in there from the Big Ten. Definitely Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and then you got to throw in Miami. So there's about 6 or 7 teams. I think in the past there was 4 or 5. Last year you could have made an argument for 5 or 6. I still think 12 is too much for the CFP. But at the end of the day, I do think that this shows that college football is expanding. It's not as regional, which I like. I have said all the time, and you're going to listen to my interview with Sean Fitzgerald tomorrow when I talk about this. The fact that I like the fact that college football is no more just regional, and I think that they should go outside the norm. Don't do the traditional Ohio State Michigan game this Saturday after Thanksgiving. Maybe do it in October one year, mix it up. I think tradition in college football is done. I think we need to move forward, and the NIL is different. Obviously, the recruiting period is different, but we are now getting more parity in college football than we ever had before. And think about if we had only the 14 playoff versus 12-team playoff. Well, now you would have one loss Georgia, obviously. You would have one loss Alabama. You would have one loss Tennessee. And what happens if Georgia would have beat Texas? I mean, these are all the questions now that we would have to answer as to who's the best 4 teams in the country, as opposed to who's the best 12 teams in the country. It definitely does change the math on the equation. Like that clip from the Brand Sports Podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brand Sports Podcast right here on YouTube.